everyone. We see participants slowly trickling in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 35th Annual Small Farm Conference. My name is Beatriz, and I work with Community Alliance with Family Farmers. And if you're here for Farmers Solidarity with Farm Workers, then you're at the right workshop. We welcome you all. We're so happy that you're here, and I want to thank this panel so much for making this space, creating this space for us to have this type of conversations, and our sponsors who make this conference possible. I want to set some ground rules right before we get started. Just keep the chat, friendly, kind. Let's all be kind to one another. And on the Q&A, if you can please use that widget right there to ask questions to our panelists. This is actually very helpful for them to keep your questions on track and keep them organized in a concise way, and they can answer to you personally. Some questions might be also answered in the broader Zoom community. So yeah, please welcome to use that. Also want to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded. And lastly, when the webinar ends, there'll be a little survey that prompts you to answer some questions and give us some feedback. All right. And with all of that said, I'm going to let this wonderful panel take it away.
Cool. Thank you very much, Beatriz. And welcome to folks who are trickling in still. And we're also waiting for one more panelist to get on here, Hazel Davalos from CAUSE. With us, we have Roman Pinal from United Farmworkers, who's going to speak in a little bit. Juvenal Solano from MECOP in the Central Valley as well is going to be speaking about the issues and the organizing that they're doing. And then Hazel Davalos as well from CAUSE in Santa Barbara County in Oxnard. And so they're going to talk about the work that they're doing. My name is Davin Cardenas. I am with North Bay Jobs with Justice up here in the North Bay. And we want to welcome you all just as we kind of try to figure out the line between solidarity, support, understanding one another's issues, and how we actually begin to create the spaces necessary where worker justice can be promoted and prevalent, and also where the agricultural community can also flourish and thrive. This kind of permaculture concept of not only the land being nourished, but the humans who work it as well. I think we're all trying to figure that out. As some of you know, the descriptor of the workshop is just really looking at, in Sacramento, there's been some big movements, especially with the United Farm Workers, around farm worker rights and laws that are coming into effect that actually make it more easier to some extent for farm workers to organize themselves, but also in various communities across the state, not only farm worker issues, but how housing pertains to farm worker issues, how health pertains to farm worker issues, and then also I would say how climate change affects farm worker issues. In our analysis, climate change changes everything, and it's going to affect not only you as small farmers, large farmers are seeing it. I'm sure you're feeling the impacts, and of course farm workers are feeling the impacts. And then I would say that also within the craft of community organizing, the craft of farm worker organizing, we're also beginning to have to recalibrate, and our organizing should always accommodate itself to material conditions and the conditions that are being felt by our base. In this case, we're talking about farm workers. And I'm gonna open it to the panel in a second, but I'll just also add that here in the North Bay, we're actually doing some really interesting organizing. We're building a massive base of farm workers on the ground in response to the wildfires that have taken place, 3 out of the last 5 years, in response to the extreme heat, and in response to the flooding and the massive rains that we've been seeing. And we've developed a couple key demands with our local government, but also pushing on large agriculture. The grapes here, the grape industry in Sonoma County, it's about a $1.9 billion industry, $2 billion. And really, in our estimate, in our outreach, in our intent of trying to build relationships with the larger agricultural industry, big ag. We've been stifled, and the demands of farm workers have also been stifled. We've been asking for implementation of disaster pay, where if workers are working in hazardous conditions, that they actually should receive time and a half. They should receive double what they make normally, because they're putting their lungs at risk, their health at risk, the well-being of their families at risk. And if workers cannot work because of conditions on the ground, conditions of climate, that they should also be compensated for lost days of work. If grapes are going to be insured, we think workers should also be insured. And we've also made a push around indigenous language justice, where in any evacuation plan that farmers, that supervisors take up, if a work crew speaks primarily in indigenous language, then whatever the emergency plan is also needs to be translated into indigenous languages. And so these are kind of what we consider basic demands, but have been stifled by the industry as a whole. We have got a couple, we're talking to everybody. You know, our theory is we have to try to reach out the hand, extend the hand to everybody in the industry, large and small. We've had a couple small farmers come into the fold and say they support our demands. And then Gallo, which is one of the largest grape growers, wine producers in our region, in their latest contract with the United Farm Workers, they actually included in the last contract that was just signed a couple months ago, they included this push around disaster pay, where if workers are working in smoke-filled, smoke-induced conditions, they are going to receive time and a half. So these are huge. You know, they might sound small, but they're actually, it's moving the dial little by little, because our response to climate change is going to be folded out. You know, they say that transitions are inevitable, but justice is not. Our economies, the way we function, is going to transition based on climate change, and how we respond should be a just-based response. And so we're trying to get ahead of that in our organizing strategies, and the farm workers are right with it, which is the beauty of it, that the farm workers are right with it, making sure that they're being disciplined and loud in their response, and we're building a base. Every month it grows larger, and it's a beautiful thing to see. So I was just gonna put that out there just as part of the North Bay or Jobs with Justice organizing strategy. We're really focused on how we as a community respond to climate change and its impacts on us. Welcome, Hazel. I'm sorry I said your name earlier, but it's wonderful to have you on here with us as another panelist. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear from the panelists for about 10 to 15 minutes each. And then we're going to talk as a general panel about one question regarding H-2A workers and the future of H-2A workers, these visa workers coming that are working in all throughout the state and the country, and just kind of how we've been seeing that on the ground, this federal program played out on a local level. And then we're going to open it for the last 15, 20 minutes to Q&A. And as Beatriz said, you can put your questions in the Q&A button. There's a button down there. I didn't know we were not going to be able to see all of your wonderful faces, but it's fine. You know, we're here kind of looking at ourselves, which feels funny. Zoom is such a funny world, but we'll make it work. And then, you know, I think I see people putting some comments in the chat. Thank you all so much for doing that. And again, use the Q&A button for Q&A. And then I think we'll get to I saw Judith, you raise your hand. I think we'll get to raising hands maybe later during Q&A, but again, you could use the Q&A button, and then you could also put comments into the chat. Cool. Well, thank you all so much. I didn't mean to be so long-winded. And again, each panelist is going to have about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll do Q&A after. And we just want to make sure that everybody has enough time. I'll be timing. And we're going to start with Juvenal and Mikap. Juvenal, I'm going to pass it to you. Te lo voy a pasar a ti. Yo voy a estar traduciendo para Juvenal. I'm going to be translating for Juvenal, who's going to talk a little bit about a statewide campaign, the Safety Net for All campaign. And then I'd also love to hear from Juvenal. There's been actually some very interesting small strikes that strawberry pickers in the Central Valley have been pulling off just based on wages and needs for paid sick leave and such. And it's very an interesting moment in terms of labor organizing. Entonces, Juvenal, voy a pasarle la palabra y voy a estar traduciendo sobre la red de seguridad para todos y también esta preguntita de los huelgas de trabajadores que han hecho recientemente entre el último año. Se lo paso. Y si me puedes dar chance de cuando hablas y luego yo traduzco.
Gracias, Daven, y buenas tardes a todos los presentes. Mi nombre es Juvenal Solano, organizador principal con Mixteco Indígena Community Organizing Project, MICOP.
And I started reading the chats, and I should not do that. So his name is Juvenal Solano from MICOP, Mixteco Indigenous Community Organizing in Project in the Central Valley.
Voy a hablar un poco sobre lo que es la SB 227, que es la ley de la red de seguridad para todos los trabajadores.
Juvenal is going to speak to SB 227, which is the Safety Net for All bill that's been being worked on by Senator Durazo.
Esta iniciativa creará un programa de trabajadores excluidos que proporcionará beneficios de desempleo a trabajadores excluidos del seguro de desempleo UI tradicional.
So this program would set up a benefit system of unemployment for workers who are usually excluded from any type of state or federal benefits.
Injustamente, la UI, que es la UI o el seguro de desempleo, injustamente ha dejado fuera a un poco más de 1 millón de trabajadores debido a su estatus migratorio. Este programa, como comento, beneficiará a trabajadores elegibles con la cantidad de $300 por cada semana de desempleo hasta un máximo de 20 semanas.
So for workers who have been left out of traditional unemployment benefits because of migratory status, it's left out around about 1 million workers here in California are left out of any type of unemployment benefits. This program would benefit those workers with about $300 per week for unemployment for up to 20 weeks.
La SB 227 también abordaría una exclusión racista que ha existido por mucho tiempo y que ha tenido un impacto económico muy devastador en las comunidades de inmigrantes o comunidades migrantes, las industrias de California y el bienestar de nuestro estado, particularmente durante tiempos de desastres como incendios forestales y recientemente todas las tormentas que hemos estado ahora sí que enfrentando en este invierno y en estos días.
So this law would really respond to racist laws or racist exclusion that has existed for a long time in our state, in our country, and really responding to the economic impacts on immigrant communities and the industries in California, the general well-being of workers in our state, especially during times of disasters like forest fires or wildfires that we were talking about, or recently these larger storms that just took place.
Para que el estado de California construya un futuro económico resistente, debe poner fin a estas exclusiones injustas para los trabajadores indocumentados.
So that California could build a just future and a just economy, needs to get rid of the exclusions that keeps workers from receiving benefits while adding so much to the economy.
Como comentaba, hay un poco más de 1 millón de trabajadores indocumentados en California que actualmente están excluidos de recibir beneficios de desempleo. Esto también tendría un impacto en los familiares y parientes de los trabajadores indocumentados.
So again, there's about 1 million workers that are currently excluded from any type of benefits and unemployment benefits, and this would also impact families and parents of workers who are undocumented.
Por ejemplo, sabemos que el 20% de los californianos menores de 18 años viven con un familiar indocumentado o ellos mismos son indocumentados.
For example, we know that about 20% of Californians under 18 live with a parent or a family member who's undocumented, or them themselves are also undocumented.
Se estima que el programa va a requerir alrededor de 356 millones, lo que incluye el financiamiento para los beneficios, así como los fondos para que el Departamento de Desarrollo de Empleo, EDD, del Estado administre el programa.
So it's estimated that it'll cost about $356 million, which includes benefits and funds at the state, the EDD, I'm messing up the acronym right now, but the administrative costs that the state would include.
De acuerdo a una investigación concluida en el 2022 por la Community and Labor Center de la Universidad de Merced, California, los trabajadores indocumentados son aproximadamente 1 de cada 17 trabajadores en California, y muchos trabajan en empleos de primera línea que son precarios, se pagan salarios muy bajos y faltan protecciones sólidas para los trabajadores.
So there was recently a study at the University of Merced that said that undocumented workers make up approximately 1 in 17 workers in California, and many are frontline workers that are exposed to the dangerous conditions and the influx of whatever it be, whether it's coronavirus, whether it's different elements that they're exposed to as frontline workers, and they're not protected in any solid way.
Los trabajadores inmigrantes indocumentados también contribuyen con aproximadamente 3.7 mil millones cada año en impuestos estatales locales, lo que es 3 billones, 7 millones.
So the workers also contribute approximately 3.7 billion, mil millones is billion, every year to state and local budgets.
Además, los empleadores de California contribuyen con un estimado de 485 millones en impuestos al Fondo de Seguro de Desempleo en nombre de los trabajadores indocumentados cada año, a pesar de que esos mismos trabajadores no reciben ningún centavo de los beneficios.
And also the employers of California, the employers of California contribute about $480 million in taxes to the unemployment fund, which the undocumented workers will never see a penny of.
Hay otros estados que han implementado programas similares de trabajadores excluidos, tales como el estado de Nueva York, el más grande, con una inversión de 2.1 mil millones en un fondo de trabajadores excluidos, con un pago de una sola vez de hasta 15,600.
So New York has actually implemented a similar program, putting in $2.1 billion into the program, and it paid out one-time payment of $15,000 to workers.
Otro estado fue el estado de Colorado, que aprobó como ley el primer programa de beneficios de seguro de desempleo permanente del país para los trabajadores indocumentados, y los trabajadores comenzarán a recibir pagos a partir del 2023.
And Colorado has also passed a similar program that they'll start to pay out to workers in 2023.
También han habido otros programas que brindaron diferentes tipos de ayuda o asistencia en efectivo a los migrantes indocumentados en los estados de Washington, Nueva Jersey, Nuevo México, Oregon, Iowa y Vermont.
So there's other states have also created different types of assistance or support to undocumented people, such as Washington, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, Iowa, and Vermont.
Por esa razón, como contribuyentes y trabajadores californianos, estamos luchando en coalición con más de 100 organizaciones no gubernamentales a través del Estado para traer dignidad, respeto y justicia a nuestros trabajadores de primera línea, tales como lo son los trabajadores agrícolas, trabajadores de las tiendas de comida, entre otros.
So that's why many in California, over 100 organizations, nonprofit, non-governmental organizations like MECOP are stepping to push for general dignity, respect, justice for frontline workers as the conditions change around us. Gracias, Juvenal. Brevemente, Juvenal, puedo también preguntar nomás si nos puede decir por qué es que los trabajadores, porque escuchamos acá, nos dio mucha felicidad, mucha esperanza, que trabajadores han tomado unos pasos para hacer huelgas en los files de fresa. ¿Y puedes decirnos por qué tomaron esa acción y cómo sucedió? Brevemente nomás. So I was asking Juvenal, we've heard last year that strawberry workers in the Central Valley actually pulled off a couple one-day strikes around issues they were facing. So I was asking Juvenal, how did that occur and why did it come about?
Sí, gracias, Daven. Precisamente esto ha ocurrido en este tiempo de pandemia. Hemos escuchado que diferentes representantes estatales y muchas personas, ¿verdad? De alguna manera han nombrado, han reconocido que los trabajadores agrícolas, entre otros trabajadores indocumentados, son esenciales, pero realmente no se está viendo los beneficios para estos trabajadores.
So we've heard many times from politicians and people in our community say that workers are frontline farm workers are essential, but we haven't seen those benefits play themselves out beyond that narrative.
Con los altos costos de vida, especialmente la renta aquí en la costa central es algo muy, pero muy caro, incluyendo pues las comidas, las gasolinas en estos últimos años. Eso ha causado que trabajadores agrícolas han ahora sí que tomado la decisión de salir a las huelgas.
So because of the high cost of living in all over the state, but in the Central Valley where MyCop organizes, that's why workers have taken the steps of having to go on one-day strikes.
Del 2021 al 2022 hemos apoyado junto con Causa aquí presente a 3 huelgas. Quizás sean pequeñas, pero para nosotros son huelgas grandes porque hemos visto que alrededor de 100, a veces hasta 200 trabajadores han salido a huelga a protestar por mejorar los salarios que están muy bajos.
So in 2020 and 2021, MyCop and Cause have supported at least 3 different small strikes ranging from 100 to 200 workers, which might seem small, but is actually very important to us and very big news to us. Bien.
Los casos... sí.
Un minuto, 2 minutos más.
Ok,
Sí.
bien rapidito. Creo que para enumerar, como punto número 1 son los sueldos. Por esa razón están saliendo a las huelgas.
Wages are top of the line. Wages are top of the reason why we have to do this.
Punto número 2 son las malas condiciones en el trabajo, que son baños sucios, falta de sombra para en tiempos de calor o falta de agua de buena calidad.
Number 2 is bad conditions on the ground, whether that's dirty bathrooms, whether that's unclean water, whether that's lack of shade provision.
Número 3 es para que les paguen los días de enfermedad, incluso que existe la ley de que les paguen los días de enfermedad. Muchas industrias o muchos rancheros no están respetando eso.
And the third is that people receive sick pay because we know that laws are on the books for workers to receive sick pay, but big ranchers are not actually implementing that or respecting that law.
Parte de esos beneficios también han estado saliendo porque pues mejoren, ¿verdad? Otros beneficios como lo que es los días festivos pagados o los bonos al final del año.
And other benefits that they've been fighting for is vacation days and bonuses at the end of the year that have never materialized.
Finalmente, por las malas o los malos tratos, por ejemplo, la represalia, la discriminación, la falta de respeto para los trabajadores.
And of course, there's constantly bad treatment to workers. Represalia is retaliation against workers and just this general lack of respect and dignity for workers' lives.
Y entre otras cosas. Entonces, por falta de tiempo, paro ahí, pero espero que en el tiempo que estemos de las preguntas, si tienen algo más específico que quisieran saber, pues con gusto vamos a responder.
Perfecto. Gracias, Juvenal. Un aplauso para Juvenal. And then también, Juvenal, si puedes o estás dispuesto, no sé, si quieres poner como un link a cómo pueden contactar a MyCop o su contacto como quieren, como se siente cómodo. I was just telling Juvenal that if he wants to put the link to MyCop's social media or a contact, he could put that in the chat if he'd like to do that. Cool. I'm gonna go over to Hazel over in cause. Hazel, I believe you're in Santa Barbara. I know the organization kind of is in multi-county, but I was gonna pass it your way to talk a little bit about some of the work you've been doing, and whatever you want to bring up. I know there's been this question of rent control in Oxnard, and there's this program for pregnant workers in the fields as well. So I'll pass it to you, and then you could take it where you want.
All right, thank you, David. Hello, everyone. My name is Hazel Davalos with Cause. I'm in Santa Barbara County, but I'm actually in Santa Maria, represent. We're in northern Santa Barbara County, and this is where the majority of agriculture is located in the county. So Cause is an economic, social, and environmental justice organization on the southern central coast. So we're in Santa Barbara and Ventura counties. We're a multi-issue organization, and we have 3 focuses, one being immigrant worker power, which really includes our farm worker organizing, housing rights, which encompasses the rent control work that I'll be sharing about in a bit, and also environmental justice, which touches a bit on work we've done around pesticide exposure and also protecting workers during disasters like wildfires, similar to North Bay Jobs with Justice. And so first, I wanted to share about our successful rent control campaign in the city of Oxnard. And I think really a big takeaway I'd want to emphasize is how important this is for farm workers and growers alike, and the hope that as more cities move towards this, that growers can be allies in these types of fights. So yes, last June, we were successful in passing a 4% annual rent cap for the city of Oxnard. The struggle that we really face in our region is that we're in coastal agricultural regions. And so we're talking about farm workers on farm worker wages, but living in coastal California and skyrocketing rents. And so that's really the context that we're dealing with going into this campaign. This campaign was achieved over the course of 3 years in close partnership with organizations like MyCop and Líderes Campesinas. And what was so powerful about it was that farm workers really were the face of the campaign. So we didn't just talk about renters, we really talked specifically about farm worker renters. And so so many of the persuasive arguments to the public and to the city council was really laying out, how much are farm workers earning and how much rents cost in the city of Oxnard. And then ultimately what was so powerful towards the last year of the campaign as we entered the pandemic, right, and dealing with Zoom and virtual meetings, was that it was farm workers overcoming those technological barriers to be able to participate via these virtual city council meetings in the hundreds. We heard the city share that these were some of the most attended and largest numbers of testimonies they've ever had at a council meeting. And so I think that also goes to show that it is possible to engage farm workers and documented workers in civic engagement and political life, regardless of whether they can vote. And I think that's always a powerful takeaway in these campaigns. And so, again, I think I'd emphasize that growers definitely had a stake in this campaign, and we weren't able to engage folks locally, but I mean, there's so much vested interest around making sure, the agricultural workforce is not priced out of the communities that they're working in. And so, that's mostly what I have to share on that campaign.
Were there any efforts made, or why do you think the agricultural grower community wasn't involved in the push for rent control?
I think the nature of being a farm worker organizing, organizations, that those relationships are a little tense sometimes, being totally frank, and so some of that's on us. But I also think that the challenges of the campaign around, I think, really revealing low wages, right, was not the best look for the industry, and so there were pieces there. But I think looking forward, if other cities are moving in that direction, there's certainly a role to play.
Absolutely. And then I know we had talked a little bit about some of the work around working with women workers who are working in the fields and are also pregnant. And I know you all were kind of trying to pilot a program with other agencies or the government, if you want to speak to that, and why it's important that we as a community, we as a whole, farmers, workers, kind of think about this component of women workers in the fields and what they're facing.
Certainly, certainly. Yeah, and I think this all falls under one umbrella. I think, you know, the efforts around rent control is really about alleviating the economic pressures on farm workers, right? That's in everyone's best interest, farm workers and employers alike. And I would say that state disability insurance or pregnancy leave falls under that umbrella as well. And similar to what Juvenal just shared, there's really an effort amongst the immigrant rights movement as a whole in the state to ensure that undocumented workers are getting access to safety net programs, right? And so, I mean, that's really what's best for workers. And I think it also can really play a key role in retention of workers if that's a challenge employers are facing. But yeah, so ultimately we're part of a really exciting project called Dar a Luz, which is about raising awareness and making policy changes around legal rights for farm workers during pregnancy and postpartum. And so yeah, we launched this project in partnership with an organization called Work Life Law. And initially, as we sort of did research, we were thinking, okay, we want to make a change so that farm worker women or pregnant farm workers can access disability leave sooner in pregnancy because of the exposure to toxins. And what we actually learned right away is that the EDD codes already state that because farm workers are exposed to toxins in the workplace, they technically should be able to be entitled and access state disability insurance from the moment they have a positive pregnancy test. I'll bet a lot of people on this call don't know that. You know, so many workers, so many doctors, so many employers don't know that. And even though it's actually code, it's not being implemented. And so much of that has to do, of course, with the lack of knowledge. But at this stage in the project, we've had enough workers try to request that support from their doctors, try to request that support from their employers. And even doctors haven't been as helpful in sending the right paperwork to get that done. And so, yeah, and it's such a key issue because, I mean, when we talk about early pregnancy and the vulnerability of a fetus during the first trimester to that exposure of pesticides, it's greater during that time than any other point in pregnancy. And so we really want to make sure that those rights are respected. And so that's the project we're involved in. And so some of the initial work has really been around the public education and awareness. So that more workers know that this is a reality and this is something they can access. But we're also, Work Life Law especially is bringing together circles of doctors and OBGYNs to make sure that they know that this is law and they can share with their peers to be able to help workers access this. And then, of course, we're doing some advocacy at the EDD level to make sure that they're training their staff to be aware of these codes. And what doesn't help is that during pandemic, and I don't know if it was the Golden State stimulus or other things, there was a lot of fraud around unemployment. And so unfortunately, they started to crack down on, you know, a lot more claims than before. And so it hasn't been helpful. And so it's all sort of a big effort that we're working on from the workers' perspective, doctor and EDD. But I will share in the chat the phone number. The biggest kind of staple piece of this project is that we've developed. So the project is called Dar a Luz, which is in Spanish, that's the way you say give birth, right? Give light. And we've in partnership with Work Life Law developed a phone hotline where workers can call and ask questions when they need support in filling out SDI applications. There's a lot of good tips. For example, undocumented workers are better off filling out a paper form than online, things like that. They'll give you all that information. And at this point where they're able to answer questions in Spanish, and either they're answering now in Mixteco or they're working on that and getting interpreters on that phone line. So that phone line is 415-581-8888. And I will drop that in the chat as well.
Cool. Thank you so much, Hazel. And it's it's just super important because like it's not when we think of the lifespan or the you know what impacts a worker, it's what their job is, what their craft is, but it goes so much beyond that, right? It's into rent, it's into the questions of how people are raising families, access to healthcare, and I think it's really important that organizations like MyCop and Cause are really listening to workers, because if we're not listening, well, none of this will come up. As organizers, we might be like, okay, this is the issue. But when workers are like, this is where we have to go, this is what we have to respond to, I think it's really important to have organizations like yours on the ground and making sure that there's a response to these things that, you know, if we don't pay attention, we might go over our heads.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a reality. You know, workers are not a monolith identity, right? Workers are renters, workers are people who have families, exactly. And so I think the role of growers is to really ensure workers that they have they're entitled to this, because we're finding that half the time it's a worker coming into the doctor's office confident that they're entitled to this benefit. And that can start with their employer educating them about that before they go. Yeah.
Yep. Beautiful. Thank you. Any questions for Hazel? Feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Yeah, and Hazel, feel free to give out whatever info you want to give out regarding the program, regarding the org, whatever you like in the chat as well. And then I'm gonna pass it to Roman. Roman Pinal with the United Farm Workers. Roman, I know you have like a broader view of the organizing. So if you want to speak to some of the work you all have done, some of the victories and how it's come about, that'd be beautiful to hear. I think it's really an important moment, because we've seen changes in Sacramento, which can impact organizing strategies on the ground. And United Farm Workers, so much of the laws that are established in California, came from years of struggles back in the 50s, 60s, and where, to some extent, organizers and farm workers were responding to exactly what Hazel was just talking about pesticides being dropped on women as they worked in the field, pesticides being dropped on workers as they worked and made other people rich, right? And so there's a legacy at hand, and I think it's really important to have you in the conversation with us, Roman. So I'll open it up to you.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and just want to give props to you, Devin, for really good facilitation. You have a career as a talk show host if you want to, man. You're doing really good. Juvenal, just wonderful presentation, very well laid out, and that's obviously a bill that would impact 1 million people in California. And Hazel, I love watching your kids grow up on Facebook, and that perspective that you bring to the campaign, the That I Lose campaign. I think that's awesome. Thank you for your leadership there. On behalf of the UFW, we've got a lot of history, as Davin was pointing to, and I really want to focus more so on the last 25 or so years, and just try to keep a little bit more, fresh from at least that perspective. We're known, there's a lot of history, there's YouTube videos and those kinds of things, and we love that history, we celebrate it, but we've learned a lot, and we've definitely have faced a very well organized, agribusiness class of employers out there who we've in some cases built relationships with, in other cases have had tough relationships with. But over the last 25 or so years, I tend to sum up 3 areas of where most of our work has been. One has been on the legislative front. So Cesar and Dolores and the Filipinos, they started out, really changing the laws for farm workers back when there was no bathrooms in the field, the short-handled hoe, and we've kept up that legacy. As Devin and others have mentioned, we've recently won new legislation to give farm workers more voting rights. Voting rights have modernized across the country, particularly during the pandemic, and we made an argument to the state of California we should update voting rights for farm workers who choose to organize union elections on the job site. In addition, on the legislative front, some of the other key standouts are, trying to be as impactful as possible. We've recently secured overtime pay for farm workers. That's an exclusion that's been around since the 1930s. And if you read the Federal Registry of what the arguments were of why farm workers in 1930 should not have overtime pay, it is just racist. And you can just see for yourself some of the sworn in, testimony and what's in there. Well, that came to an end last year when farm workers finally got the 8-hour day here in California, and we're advancing that in a few other states as well. An area very, very, again, kind of in the legislative bucket, an area very close in my heart. In 2005, the whole summer I spent supporting 6 families who were victims who had a loved one die of heat stroke in cases where there was no water, there's no shade, no rest, and just wrong types of management decisions being made in that environment when it's 100+ degrees, and 5 farm workers died, and one 16-year-old almost died. And during that summer, we were making a case then to Governor Schwarzenegger to bring in some basic protections. And we've been working on that, and we're proud of that accomplishment there. A lot of collaboration from a lot of partners. But today there's now, good laws in the books in terms of heat protections, paid breaks when it's over 95, shade, and extra water and training for workers during the, and we are beginning to see some difference there in terms of heat exhaustion and those types of things as the environment gets warmer. So in the legislative area, we see a place where, we can have an impact. We're pursuing immigration reform, and we've got, although over the next 2 years, that's going to be a challenge. That's another area where we see some advancement there. In the courts, that's been a place where we've struggled and tried to, uplift some conditions. And the couple that I'll point out, it used to be a common occurrence for 50,000 table grape workers at the end of their day to collect their 7 to 10 picking pans, these roughly that big plastic picking pans, stack them on your lap on your car ride home, wash them at night, unpaid work. And that was the practice for 50,000 workers for decades. And it was through our interpretation of, time off, being paid for work or not being unpaid for work, and through some litigation that we were able to correct that. And so, now 50,000 workers do not have to perform work off the clock at home and to do clean those picking pans. That's in the table grape industry. For about 40,000 workers in the vegetable industry, it used to be a common practice that you had to go to work on the company bus. And never mind if you lived in Greenfield, you had to drive to Salinas, get on the bus, and then the bus took you back to Greenfield to work, and then back on the bus to Salinas so you can drive home. Made absolutely no sense. And we basically argued through our litigation that if that was a job requirement, it should be paid. It should just be paid. And as soon as we prevailed in the courts, that practice came to an end. And now if you're a Greenfield worker, if you want to just go from your home in Greenfield to the work site in Greenfield, you can do that and get home to your family a lot sooner. So just in the courts, that's been a place where we've tried to shine a light on some of the bad practices that we think need to just be more sustainable for in terms of working conditions. And then in our collective bargaining work, we've tried to very much be impactful for more than just the workers that we represent. So this, we represent the workers at Gallo. Gallo is one of the largest employers of more quality type wine, I guess, Sonoma County, Napa County. And we've had a contract there. Workers won an election there in 1994, and we won the contract in 2004, if I remember right, 2005. And so that was a good example, right? So where we have large relationships with large employers, we've been able to usher in some bigger differences. So for example, the second largest employer, about 1,400 to 1,700 workers in the vegetable industry, Diorigo Brothers, they have a medical plan that is, I think anyone here would appreciate having with, it's well, anyways. So that's another example, right? Just in terms of targeting large employers and, through the collective bargaining process, trying to uplift as conditions for as many workers in those particular industries as well. And we were happy to partner with Devin and the North Bay Jobs with Justice to present this issue of worker protection and pay during the fires at our collective bargaining process there at Gallo. And then just the last standout there in terms of collective bargaining is in places where we can have some more, some market share, so to speak. So in the mushroom sector, about 70% of mushrooms that are produced in California are unionized. And that, relatively speaking, is a middle-class job. Our members in the mushrooms buy homes, they buy new cars. They on average earn about $50,000 a year with up to 14 paid holidays, a full a family medical plan that's primarily paid for by the employer, and a pension plan. And I'm going to come back to mushrooms at the end of the presentation in terms of some of the things that we're doing. So just large employers and market share in particular, we see some good impact. And then I just wanted to end by what we've learned throughout the years, and we got this from retailers. When we kind of surveyed some of our peer relationships, what retailers told us is that you all are really good at bringing workers together and rah and si se puede, and you go on strike and all that stuff. Is there any way you can use those skills to bring more value to the workforce and to their employers? And that just set off a whole different process in our organization. And so we've taken that concept into different areas. Some of it is innovative, and some of it, is new. But in partnership with farmers and retailers, we started the Equitable Food Initiative to try to bring in worker input and provide value, more earnings for workers who want to uplift food security, trying to diminish the possibility for contamination and foodborne illnesses and whatnot in the supply chain as workers, touch produce before consumers get them. And so we've developed that organization a little bit outside the UFW. That came out of our orbit. And then additionally, we've created another organization called Cierto, which partners with farmers who want to think differently about the H-2A program. And so we developed an organization, it's a nonprofit organization, to recruit H-2A workers free of the bribes that is commonplace and other trafficking types of situations, taking passports away and those kinds of things. And so we assure that that's not going to happen in the recruitment process. And then just lastly, even at small farms, and if folks are familiar with Swantonberry Farms, it's possible that Jim Cochran is somewhere in attendance, maybe in this group. If he is, hello, Jim. But Jim came to us in 1998, and he was neutral with his workers when they decided to form a union. And right away, we entered into a collaborative approach of collective bargaining. And so he asked if we can use our branding, our eagle and our imagery, and go market that in some of the farmers markets, some of the small farmers markets in places like Berkeley and San Francisco, and even in his farm stand a little north of Santa Cruz. And we, of course, said yes, whatever paper licensing, absolutely, if there's any benefit for that. And the way Jim describes it is his strawberries, which are some of the sweetest, not only because they're good and organic and sustainable from the earth, from that perspective, but also from the worker perspective. He describes his farm stand as being the first to sell out, wherever he shows up. And so we think and it's pretty expensive, like $6 a pint. They're really good berries. So if you're ever around them, definitely encourage folks to hop on him. But on the ground, when you talk to workers and his managers, they talk about things like how they cross-train each other. And so what that means is, Jim Cochran, 20 years ago was a organic strawberry farmer. And today he's added on, I forget how many, right? But, 5, 7, 8 additional products. And the only way that goes from farming to selling and be profitable is the cross-training concepts that farm workers are empowered to do. It's just an outcome of a collaborative relationship there. And so Swantonberry is one of the examples that we highlight there in terms of a good collaborative relationship there with the employer. So I lost track of time, Devin, but am I good? You're on mute.
You have about 2 minutes left, 1 to 2 minutes left.
The last thing I'll share then on the collaborative bucket. This is pretty large producer of green onions, radishes, cilantro, and parsley in the Ventura County region. And there's been this new program that the USDA has brought in to bring in some financial relief for farm workers who worked during the pandemic. That's the main requirement. It's a $600 financial relief for being an essential worker, and you showed up to work and you harvested and you were more exposed to the virus as a result. And so this farm, roughly about 180 workers, was very much interested in having their employees work or apply for this. So we collaborated. It wasn't rocket science, but we basically, myself and a couple of my colleagues showed up at the farm at 5 in the morning, and every 30 minutes, the farm would bring 10 of the workers in to apply for this relief payment. And we progressed, and by the time we were done, 180 workers applied for the financial relief, and the farm was very happy because in one day we're bringing in over $100,000 of cash to their labor pool, to their workers. And so that's another example of what happens when you're in a collaborative relationship. You can bring in, real money to the people who are doing the hard work there. So I think that's
beautiful.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go for it.
So I mentioned mushrooms, right?
Yes.
And I mentioned how at the beginning we were, we historically have gotten into fights with the table grape industry, with Gallo, with, you can look at the YouTube videos. And in the mushroom sector, I mentioned how, we've had a pretty good run over the last 20 years. Farm workers are retiring with a good pension. They're having a good job. And that's now at risk. And it's a risk that is very interesting. I would love to see what people, what my peers say about this and, what others say, think about this, right? But private equity and the investor class is coming into agriculture. They've already come into grapes and the wine grapes as well. And just last week, if you look at our social media, we're highlighting that a private equity firm is coming into mushrooms. And we're really concerned about that. We're concerned about that because private equity, all they care about is they're like vacuum cleaners. They just want to suck out all the value for their shareholders, for their private institutional billionaire investors, right? And they're going to scorch earth on worker wages and conditions and whatever it is that's going to happen. We have our approach to that, but that's one of the battles, one of the areas of concern for us here as we move forward.
Thank you, Roman. And I think part of what I take and kind of what we preach also is just like the more relationships you have, the more interesting doors can open. And sometimes we might think we're at odds with an industry or at odds with an individual, but it should never denote our ability to actually figure out who we are in relationship to another, because you're going to actually develop relationships you might not have foreseen. Sometimes, self-interests don't coincide and you can go your separate ways, and that's fine. But as humans, we should be in communication, able to talk about things. And then, if they don't coincide, they don't coincide. At least we had the conversation. But then when they do coincide and they flourish, that's like where the magic happens, right? And that's kind of one of the contributors to social change, is like where we find that sweet spot where energies coincide. I wanted to also give a shout out on, I talked about the Gallo contract and disaster pay getting into the last contract. It was a demand that workers on the community put out. It was a demand that our relationship with United Farm Workers in Santa Rosa heard, and it was something that went right into the contract. But it came out of the worker struggle in the community and made it into the union contract. And another small biodynamic farm, wine grower, grape grower in Cloverdale, Eco Terreno, they also heard and they were like, we want to be with you. We want to do that. So they also signed on to our demand, which is really important because they're saying we want to take care of the earth. We want to take care of our workers. We want to make sure that this biodynamic process is also about us considering all the implications that go into not only the earth life around us, but the human life that is working the land. So, but we have to make sure we're trying to spread our wings as wide as possible, and good things can happen, right? I'd like to see if just for this last little segment, little 10-15 minute segment, we'll open it up to Q&A after, and then if we end early, we don't have to go till 5:45 either, but we'll see how, what's out there. I just wanted to bring up this question of the H-2A workers that Roman brought up. He brought up a program the United Farm Workers has begun. Just because I know in many communities, Santa Rosa, Sonoma County, Napa included, it's a very interesting moment for workers where you have climate-induced conditions that are lessening even like the weight of grapes because of this extreme drought that we're in, a drought that we've never seen for over 1,000 years, something so prevalent. It's affecting the product. Secondly, we have the automation of the grape fields, at least where we're seeing more machines putting in, which has an impact on the plants, the actual vineyards themselves, has an impact on the land, and it of course has an impact on workers' wages and their ability to work. So you have climate, you have automation, and then you have this question of H-2A visa workers being brought in, which in essence, the H-2A program is supposed to support industries wherever across the country, in any industry, is not finding a local workforce to do the job or to get the job done. The H-2A visa program brings workers from other countries to support those industries that might be affected by lack of available workers. And I think what we've found on the ground, at least in Santa Rosa, has been pretty prevalent, that the employers, that's their go-to program. They're actually displacing local workers, going through this program, and it creates a situation where many workers are actually pretty vulnerable, because if you're in the program, we had a case in last year where a bunch of H-2A workers came to us. This is Moritzen Farms. I want to say the name Moritzen Farms in Healdsburg because of how they acted. And the issue was the worker said, a supervisor's yelling at us. We think that the supervisor doesn't want us to come back next year, so he's treating us like shit. And we can't really say anything. So what do? They came to us. We went through a process of working with Cameron Moritzen, the owner of this vineyard, hoping that he would be able to work things out. Great process, great conversations, even got the workers to meet with him face to face. He said he was so sorry about how they were feeling. He was so sorry about the conditions that would never happen again. Threw them a carne asada party the next day. Great things. And then what happens the next year? He doesn't bring them back. He doesn't bring them back. A clear retaliation. We have a case with the ALRB right now. But the vulnerability of H-2A workers is pretty extreme, because if you're facing conditions, if you're living in cramped living situations, your ability to advocate for yourself is nil to none to, it's very difficult. And so it's an interesting moment that many agricultural producers find themselves in. So I just wanted to open that up and say, just get hear a little bit from whoever would like to take it from here.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Hazel. You go first.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can just share a bit about some of the local advocacy we've done around the issue. I don't know the exact numbers, but as far as H-2A workers across the state, I know Santa Maria and Salinas are pretty, par and par for having the largest number of H-2A workers. I think here in the city of Santa Maria, we could have between 12 and 1,500 workers come any given season. And so as community advocates and a farm worker organization, we've really tried to figure out how can we raise the floor and better the conditions for guest workers here in our community, while facing the challenges of the fact that the H-2A program is a federal program, and local government, municipalities, city, county often will throw their hands up and say it's a federal program, there's nothing we can do. And so, I can just share a bit about some of the work we've done. But I think it probably goes without saying in this audience that, I think we all know the H-2A program really comes with a legacy riddled with injustices and abuse. And I think any grower taking on that program needs to be conscious of that, right? And play an active role in preventing that. And I think, something we're constantly saying is that it's a lot of power in the hands of one person when someone's an employer, your landlord, your immigration status in this country, your transportation, your food, right? That's so much responsibility and so much power and authority over one person. And so that's just a reality. But I think an area where we've done some work has been around housing, really trying to make sure that there's more just housing conditions for local guest workers. And so some of that has come from the place of trying to influence planning policies. And so what we've seen in our area is that there's been some efforts by local growers to build H-2A housing on the side of the fields in the more rural outskirts. And so we've been active in trying to advocate for county policies that discourage that. And frankly, they haven't done it a lot because the infrastructure is just too hard, right? Bringing all the plumbing and everything, and even just the city resources to these outskirts, unincorporated areas. And then at the same token, on the other side, we've also tried to advocate for the city to ease up on some regulations around putting H2A housing in the community. And that's really what we've advocated for, is that the best possible scenario for workers is being housed in the heart of the city. Given that they don't have cars usually, I mean, being able to walk to the grocery store, the laundromat, cash their checks and get to know locals and understand the ropes, right? Have that support in that community, be able to walk to the doctor, all of that's so important. And so, yeah, I think a couple of the victories around that work have appeared as planning policies, but we were also successful in beating back a proposed labor camp that was going to house over 600 workers in these kind of warehouse metal sheds. And a lot of that intersected with some of the work we were doing during the pandemic, right, around COVID outbreaks. There was a high profile story where a guest worker actually passed away in a hotel. And the county public health department wasn't aware that these were H2A workers, or that they were not even aware that this was congregate housing, and didn't have a strategy around addressing H2A housing. And so there's just so much, education to do with local government about what they can do. And then last thing I'll say is that we've also been successful in getting our public health department to be more active on food inspections. We had a group of H2A workers come to us because they were basically on hunger strike because they found sponge pieces in their burritos. And when we brought that to to the public health department, they immediately knew the commissary, the carniceria that they were using. They're washing the meat in the same place they're washing their hands. We have a record, and they've gotten more involved now. And in February, they're going around and making sure companies have adequate, situations for food for workers. And so, anyways, I'm just sharing things that we've been able to do locally. And I think the last thing I'll say is that when we've talked with local workers, they've heard from growers that, hey, we've heard growers say H2A workers are just more loyal, and that's why we're going with them. And local farm workers have just shared, hey man, if we got our wages raised, if we got housing provided to us, we'd be the most loyal employees you could find, right? And so I think we're constantly trying to advocate for growers to really try some creative solutions before resorting to the H2A program.
Yeah, I think I'm so impressed with cause, and entering that housing space we have not had the bandwidth at all for it. That's a smart move, and I think that's very creative. I think in the H2A space we have a lot of work to do, and not a few accomplishments, a few things that we feel good about, but a lot more work that we got to do. And the suffering is real when it's undeniable, when you see the food, when you see the housing conditions, when someone tells you they took away my passport, right? That's a lot of leverage. I like the way you said it, Hazel, that one person has over them. We're in the process of debarring a mushroom farm in Washington State, the first mushroom farm. Technically, it's not permissible to bring in H2A in year-round employment, but this mushroom farm did. And we're uncovering child labor violations, trafficking circumstances, and the Department of Labor is investigating, but all the injustice already happened. And so there's a lot of work to do there. Yeah. Some of the highlights, and we see we're close, I think, of seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, in that there are a few union collective bargaining agreements where H2A workers have access to a medical plan. They have access to someone like myself. If there's an issue with a foreman who yells, they have a seniority number that makes it very difficult for an employer to. So just the seniority takes a little bit of that leverage away from the employer. Right now it's defined. I'm number 5. They can't hire someone before me because I'm number 5 or whatever it is, right? And so there's a little bit of promise in that work. We're seeing H2A workers organize with us in the state of New York, workers at 6 farms, primarily H2A workers in the apple harvest have recently organized with us with the new card check legislation in New York. And we hope that that will also bring in some of those protections. And, but yeah, I think there's a lot of work. The last thing I would say, there's another place where some of our litigation work has, I think, saved tens of millions of dollars for farm workers. So one of the last parting gifts that President Trump gave to farm workers was a rewrite of the H2A laws pertaining to wages. And we sued in partnership with Farm Worker Justice and the UFW Foundation and have blocked that. And every year that we have blocked that, it means that local workers continue to earn wages that are not impacted by undermining, you know, domestic wages with an H2A program. So it's a lot of work that we got to do there.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really, I know I've been talking with some of Antonio and others here locally in Santa Rosa about the fact that some of the H2A crews in Boleto or Gallo are actually union. It's union H2A workers. It was really interesting in terms of calibrating organizing strategy to that reality, but I thought that was really fascinating. Juvenal, ¿quieres decir algo acerca de este tema también?
Sí, creo que muy breve, nada más quiero agregar un poco en la parte de el desplazamiento de los trabajadores locales.
So Juvenal is going to respond to this question of displaced local workers.
Últimamente hemos estado escuchando de trabajadores locales que pues de alguna manera están preocupados porque no han estado trabajando tantas horas como lo hacían antes que llegaran los trabajadores H2A.
So we've been hearing from a lot of workers who are very concerned because they haven't been working as many hours, many days due to the influx of outside workers.
Y básicamente lo que vemos que este sistema lastima no solamente a los trabajadores locales, pero también a los trabajadores H2A.
But we think that the system, the H2A program, not only hurts local workers, but it also hurts the H2A workers themselves.
Por ejemplo, a los trabajadores H2A, muchos de ellos vienen con el miedo de levantar la voz porque saben que si levantan la voz para hablar por sus derechos, el próximo año ya no regresan y tengo varios ejemplos de esos.
Yeah, there's many examples that I have of workers who won't raise their voice when issues come up because they have the fear that they won't be brought back next year.
Y para los trabajadores locales, al exigir sus derechos, la respuesta que se les da por parte de los pues granjeros es de que ellos tienen que cumplir primero con el contrato que prometieron a los trabajadores H2A y por esa razón le están dando menos trabajo a los trabajadores locales.
Yeah, and when workers locally try to raise their voice, they say, well, we have to complete this H2A contract and we have to give them priority because they're here and that's why we can't offer you what you're asking for.
Entonces, básicamente, la fuerza laboral local existe. Como dijo Hazel, aquí la situación es de que aseguremos de que los trabajadores locales tengan acceso a viviendas más adecuadas, de bajos ingresos y que se les pague mejor.
Yeah, the local workforce exists, but like Hazel was saying, that we have to make sure that housing and wages are provided and adequate for those who are here and are on the ground.
Entonces, por parte de nosotros como organización, estamos, digamos, a favor de que se mejoren las condiciones, primeramente para los trabajadores locales, porque son los que están aquí ya años, pero igual sin dejar a los trabajadores H2A, pero en realidad tenemos mucha fuerza laboral local con la cual podemos trabajar.
Yeah, no escuché el primer parte de lo que dijiste, que el programa va a expandir, ¿o cómo?
No, como organización nosotros estamos pues primeramente a favor de que se mejoren las condiciones para los trabajadores locales porque existe mucha fuerza laboral local con la cual podemos trabajar y no estamos en contra de que no se mejoren las condiciones de los trabajadores H2A, pero estamos diciendo que podemos empezar con lo que ya tenemos en casa.
As an organization, MECOP is saying that they're not against bettering the conditions for workers from outside, but that we have to really think about how do we benefit better the conditions for the workers that are on the ground right here amongst us in our local communities.
Gracias.
Bien. Muchas gracias, Juvenal. I think we bring this topic up to folks that are listening in, just because it's coming up more and more. Many small farms might already be working with H2A workers, and I've heard small farmers say it's amazing, it's great that we have this access, and then we just want to make sure that it's balanced with this other side of how it's impacting local workers and how big agriculture is really taking advantage of this program and taking advantage of workers. It's also just not pleasant on a mental health issue. Just workers packed together in houses, packed together in rooms, living here for 8 months out of the year, 9 months out of the year, not able to drive, not able to have a social life outside of where you live. You sleep, you work, you sleep, you work. And I know there locally, at least, there's restrictions on what they're able to do in terms of their social lives, which these are young men, primarily we haven't worked with women H2A workers. These are young men who are 20, 21, 22, maybe new fathers, and they are sitting with this reality that I sleep and then I work, I sleep and then I work, and I have to fight for kitchen rights. I have to fight for bathroom rights in this place that I sleep and then I work and then I sleep. So just there has to be a mental health toll. And so I think we just wanted to bring the conversation up, just because I know it's something we've all talked about in terms of local advocacy organizations, organizing projects that are building up around the state. It's a constant conversation amongst us, and we thought it would be important for folks that are in the small farm agricultural or large ag, to also hear some of the conversations that's taking place on a ground level. So thank you all for going into that. We'll open it up to questions for the last like 10 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes. But yeah, see if there's anything out there. I know earlier on, Holly had a question for Juvenal. ¿Es 1 millón de trabajadores en California? Los millones que estás hablando para la red de seguridad, ¿es nomás campesinos o es 1 millón de trabajadores indocumentados?
Es en general, es 1 millón de trabajadores de las diferentes industrias en donde sabemos que hay muchos trabajadores indocumentados.
Que se beneficiarían de la red de seguridad.
Correcto.
Yes. So Holly, Juvenal was saying that it's 1 million workers, undocumented workers in California that would benefit from this safety net for all campaign about access for unemployment and other things. And then Brian put in a question there about a network of small and mid-scale family farmers. They've heard there's interest in supporting more funding for farm worker housing, farm worker workforce development, training, drought disaster relief insurance, if paid by the state, which is an interesting distinction. What the government's role is and then what the farmer's role is. And we're having that debate in a public way, but it's really important to distinguish. And then either path to citizenship. How would you, like farmer advocacy orgs like CAF, CalCan, communicate with your orgs to explore common ground, support campaigns? Are there pitfalls to avoid or lessons to learn based on past experience? Anyone want to take a shot at that last question? How would you, like farmer advocacy orgs like CAF is who's sponsoring this whole conference, CalCan, to communicate with your orgs to explore common ground or support campaigns? Anybody like to get a shot? I mean, the first thing I will say, and if anybody wants to add on, is just again, and I think we talked about it when Roman was speaking, that like we have to be actually willing to at least figure out where our self-interests coincide and if they coincide, and at least being in a space where we can advocate and talk with each other about what, because it could be that the needs and necessities of farm workers are different from the needs of producers and agricultural producers, right, in farms. But if we don't actually sit down and try to figure out where the magic might happen, the magic might ensue, I think so the first thing I would say is just us communicating to the extent we can and trying to build relationships. They might go nowhere and they might create magic, and I think that's what we have to be willing to put ourselves into. And then I think especially if you have a broader platform such as CAF or CalCan, and you can support local orgs that are pushing on an employer or pushing on an advocacy level on local government, county government, state government to actually reinforce that messaging. Because I know locally, big ag tries to speak for all ag. And we know that that's not always the case. We know that local farmers have different needs, different politics, and a different connection to the land than sometimes larger producers. And so the struggle that I'm sure many on the call are aware of is trying to not be usurped into the messaging of big ag, but trying to represent yourself. So when we see opportunities to advocate on small issues, on worker struggles, I think it's actually very important in terms of the narrative and the ability of people to speak up. Anyone else? Oh, yeah, go for it. Anybody?
Okay.
Go for it, Hazel.
Oh, I just wanted to respond to the last question that was just put in the chat because I think it connects with this theme. I would say that I think the project we were most excited about, and it ended up not coming through, I think, because of there were some more stringent regulations on H2A housing during the pandemic, which made it hard. But there was a point where a local nonprofit housing developer was going to partner with a pretty large grower to build that housing and manage that housing for H2A workers. And we really thought that that was a model that should be replicated all over the state wherever possible. I mean, in particular with the H2A program, because it does create sort of this middleman, right? And ultimately the housing developers know what they're doing. I remember there was a bill, I think it was Wiener who had authored it, and it didn't go very far. Because it seemed like he didn't get a whole lot of input from advocates. There was a bill around like trying to streamline growers' abilities to build H2A housing on farmland. And that was a proposal that we had really mixed feelings about because of the things I stated earlier. And then I think would come up against a bunch of challenges wherever locally, right? At LAFCO and like preserving farmland, all those things. And so I think whatever kind of legislation or ideas are put out there, I think a real model to look at is growers partnering with local nonprofit housing developers and doing that work.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan. And then it looks like there was a question in there for Roman specifically about why the mushroom industry has such high rates of unionization. Are there any conditions in general that seem to facilitate high levels of unionization for some crops over others?
Yeah, there's a long history of mushroom workers organizing with the UFW, and I think if you're a mushroom worker, you tap into that history. It's a place where Cesar Chavez used to go out and negotiate himself with employers and bring some of his creativity and to that process. And it could be a good job. There's a market out there that will that will support good jobs. The market will also take advantage of farm workers in this particular example. Folks may have heard recently in Half Moon Bay, there was a mass shooting where it looks like a farm worker was going to be charged for some damage to a machine is what the AP reported. And there was $100 or some odd dollar charge that the management was going to levy on this employee who busted a machine. That's illegal. That shouldn't be happening. And then we all know what happened. That same owner of the farm in Half Moon Bay also owns the Juvenal. You remember the old California mushroom farms, and they brought in minimum wage jobs where folks can comfortably make a good living and get into the housing market in a respectable way in some of these expensive places to live. Those mushrooms sell at places like Pavilions and Whole Foods, right? These are not your white mushrooms, right? So you've got two examples there where the market is rewarding productive employees, farm workers, who happen to be union members, who have collaborative relations with their employers. And, those have been sustained now for 20 years in many cases. And then on the other extreme, you've got this guan. The media didn't report on the name, the label of the mushroom. I'll report it. It's guan's mushroom. Like, go to pavilions, if you see guan's mushrooms, that's where this incident happened, and that's where the name of the mushrooms that are produced in Ventura County. On the ground, they're known as California Terra Farms and Ventura Terra Garden Farms. That's the other example. So we still have work to do there, and we're going to continue to advocate for farm workers, particularly in the mushroom industry. But again, the market lines up with good jobs there.
Thanks, Roman. And then there was a quick question on this. Anybody know where the safety net for all legislation stands right now? ¿Dónde está la legislación de seguridad para todos ahorita? ¿Alguien sabe en qué está?
Pues ahorita básicamente está en el proceso de renacer otra vez, ya porque el año pasado desafortunadamente el gobernador la vetó. Entonces,
last year the governor vetoed it, so it's in the process of being born again.
Sí, entonces básicamente estamos en el comienzo, estamos revisando de que más adelante el gobernador de alguna manera haga modificación, porque al presentar su presupuesto de este año tampoco no mencionó sobre los fondos para este proyecto. Entonces estamos trabajando para asegurar de que en la revisión pueda quedar como presupuesto.
So we're hoping that this was not included in the governor's budget that he put out, and so we're hoping that some revisions are made in order to make sure it gets in there, and that they make the tweaks necessary to get this off the ground this year.
Sí, ayudaría mucho si ustedes pueden llamar o de alguna manera buscar a las oficinas del gobernador para decir que esto es esencial, no solamente para los trabajadores, pero para que pues la economía esté más fuerte aquí en California.
So calls to the government, letters to the government are really important, just so that he knows, they know that this is important not only for the livelihood of farm workers, but for the general well-being of state and agriculture in our state, all of us.
Gracias.
Gracias, Juana. And then Olivia had a question about someone who works as a consultant and performs site audits at facilities looking at other systems. If we see concerning practices with employees, how do we report what we identify? Roman, you got any insights on that?
There's multiple, anecdotal stories of farm workers calling Cal OSHA, calling the labor commissioner. I mean, there's even 911 recordings of, an ambulance getting lost out in the field. It's just a challenge. And actually, when farm workers have a union and they elect a shop steward, we call them crew reps, in their fields, it's kind of a conservative way of approaching, to a solution to that problem, right? Yeah, empower right. Workers, to do it, right? That would be my preferred approach. Train farm workers to handle the, whatever the challenges are, whether it's the bathrooms or those kinds of things, right? That would be the best way. Farm workers are super capable. There is talent. There's creativity and innovation. There's a word in Spanish we use called gana. They don't want to, they want to work. They want to be paid well, and they want to, do what they do. They're very proud of their work. Yep. And so they bring all those positive attributes to even some problems and challenges in our experience. We just have to facilitate that to happen. Unionization is one of the ways of having that happen. It's not the only way, but that is one of the ways.
Great. Thank you. I don't see any more questions or comments. I do just want to give a big round of applause to each of the panelists for being on, for taking time out of your day and really kind of bringing other folks into the conversation. If maybe before we go, folks can maybe one more time put any way they could be contacted into the chat. And just like really, when we were planning this out, we had a couple of planning meetings and we were like, we don't know what's going to happen with the panel, but we're stoked to just be building together amongst us, because we don't create enough space to have such amazing folks kind of share. And we hope to break bread in person soon too. But really stoked, just really happy and privileged to be on the panel with y'all. And thank you, Beatriz, for getting us organized and oriented with all the tech and everything. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here and answering the Q&A and making those questions live so that others could see. I also want to let everyone know that you can also go back into Sched and you can find the panelist information there, more about them, who they are, what they do, their organizations they're a part of, the work that they're doing out there. So I definitely encourage you, in case you lost it in all those chats, and you could always go back to Sched and find that there and find their information. There's going to be a little survey that pops up in the end that I just want to remind everyone to please partake on that. And if any of the panelists have any closing words, please feel free to use this 5 minutes to do that. You still got a little bit more time if you want to have some closing words.
I don't think I would just, what we always say is listen to the land, listen to the workers. That's if we're doing those sort of things, we're on the right path. Anyone else want to chime in?
I'll echo that. Listen to the land and listen to the workers. That sounds good to me, Devin.
I think a lot of us here in the chat agree that you should be a motivational speaker, a radio host. I think a lot of people gave great advice for all these jobs you could have with that enthusiasm you have, Devin. So thank you so much to this panel. Thank you to all the participants who stayed here and were active participants. We hope to see you again tomorrow bright and early. The workshops start right around 8:30. So get on those workshops. See you tomorrow and throughout the week. And like Devin said, we hope to see you all of those in-person gatherings too. We would love to see your faces and come and share with us what was your favorite workshop. What was the most insightful thing you took from this conference? So please join us in those in-person gatherings. And without anything else, I'm gonna let everyone go home, go make dinner. And thank you so much to everyone for being here today. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.